This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
Protecting certain Canadian manufacturing sectors, including electric vehicles, aluminum and steel, against related Chinese imports and measures. With us today from the Alberta Wagar Association, Malaya Chetinkaya, Program and Outreach Manager. From the Automotive Parts Manufacturer Association, a regular person here, Flavio Volpe, President. And from Clean Energy Canada, Joanna Kisiris, Director of Public Affairs. We welcome you all. We will start.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses. Ms. Chetinkaya, thank you for bringing more light here to the ongoing horror that is the Uyghur genocide. From my observation, the ESG movement in practice sometimes feels like the E-only movement. It ignores social and governance impacts in the rush to achieve specific environmental objectives. There is a major risk that the new battery economy is strengthening our strategic adversaries, undermining Canadian workers and causing untold suffering among Uyghurs, but also people in the DRC who are often exploited by Chinese companies. So we need to be smart about how we respond to these changes. And yet some, in spite of these realities of social and governance impacts, press forward with their kind of one-track mind. I think we need to have an approach that aligns with our economic interests, our strategic interests, and our moral obligations. And that is why Conservatives have pushed for strong measures to counter the strategic efforts of the Chinese Communist Party to dominate the market through tactics that are both anti-competitive and immoral. You spoke in your opening statement about the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, a bipartisan bill that passed in the United States that creates a reverse onus, essentially a presumption that those companies that are operating in East Turkestan or Xinjiang are using forced labor. Why is this presumption reasonable in your view, and should we adopt legislation in Canada that aligns with this bipartisan piece of legislation in the United States?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Chair. I want to start by saying 100% this electric vehicle battery, the EV batteries are also the exploitation in the DRC is very prominent. When it comes to specifically the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act within the U.S., even the Canadian government has released a study called the Study of Supply Chain Risks Related to Xinjiang Forced Labor, where they clearly state that this is a legislation that we want and trying to adopt within Canada, whereas the U.S. legislation is significantly stricter, assuming all products coming in from that region, because there is a lot of evidence and a lot of reports that show us that things such as cotton, which even our report that the government of Canada has released states that 85% of so-called Chinese cotton is coming from East Turkestan, which means this is directly being linked to the slave labor of Uyghur people, as well as things like tomatoes, solar panels, polysilicon is coming from the region of East Turkestan. Therefore, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act is assuming that because of the backing and reports and the facts that are behind these different products that are with forced labor, that anything coming from that region can be assumed to be forced labor because of how it is all interlinked.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things people say about enforcement around forced labor is that it's complicated. It's complicated to unravel these supply chains and figure out exactly what came from where and to have proper identification and accountability. But it would seem to me that if complexity is the challenge, then we could simply be aligning with our American friends and partners to have an aligned regime so that if a shipment is turned around from docking and unloading its goods in the United States, the same shipment could not be unloaded in Canada. And yet, we haven't pursued that kind of alignment. If we had alignment, we could be sharing information. It would actually make our enforcement much easier. And this is in a context where, based on the numbers you presented, the Americans are succeeding and we're failing. They are stopping many shipments. We're not stopping any shipments. And those shipments that are being stopped on their way to the United States could well be coming to Canada. So why don't we pursue greater collaboration with the United States, greater information sharing on forced labor? Wouldn't that solve the problem?
I 100% agree. I think that while both countries, neighboring countries, have the same goal in mind, We do not want forced labor. We do not want to be complicit in a genocide, no matter how far away it is from our home here in Canada or the U.S. If the U.S., and it's clear, like you said, has these legislation in place, has the materials, has the resources in place to detect forced labor within shipments, we should 100% be aligning with them, working together with them, and then we can even expand it further and make sure that we can, really have a hand in stopping the use of forced labor.
By expand it further, I suppose you're talking about seeking to partner with other like-minded democratic countries on a collaborative framework to keep forced labor out that benefits workers within the free world and that puts pressure on China to put a stop to this Uyghur genocide. One final question: the USMCA contains provisions on combating forced labor. There's an obligation on the part of parties to that agreement to take actions to combat forced labor. It doesn't include any kind of an alignment of structures, but it includes a commitment. It seems to me a bit of a trade risk if the Americans are able to see that they're putting a stop to forced labor products coming in from East Turkestan and that Canada is not. That raises some questions about our compliance with that agreement. And it seems like a win-win if we could try to bring Canada into line with that agreement and collaborate more with the Americans in order to avoid potential criticism that we're not living up to our trade obligations. I'm basically out of time, but maybe just quickly if the chair will allow your response to that.
100%, I completely agree. We should have, unity and collaboration with like-minded countries when it comes to forced labor.
And I asked the question, I said, why? They're decarbonizing the steel industry, and they decided that they would in Ontario. So Algoma Steel is the second largest steel producer in Canada, and they're decarbonizing. And I just asked the question, I said, why is the steel industry doing that? And she just said, because the market's going that way. Would you agree that the auto sector is also heading towards decarbonizing as well? And how important is it for the supply chain in the auto, in particular the EV industry, to be decarbonized?
Authenticity. So if you're going to sell a product that's going to be clean, that is going to have no tailpipe emissions, that is going to help you achieve your green standards, whether those are EV mandates or others, then you've got a responsibility looking at what all of your supplies and all the raw materials, where are they made, how are they made? And in our conversations with American officials, a lot of where they're going on a regulatory front is what's the embedded carbon level in the materials, from steel to the parts that are made out of steel to the cars that they go in. They get it, and I think that we get it too here. But that's also one of the ways in which China is getting an unfair advantage here. 218 gigawatts of new coal-fired power was approved in China over the last 18 months to sell us the steel that wraps the batteries, that goes into the clean cars, that come to us from forced and otherwise underpaid labor to meet our objectives.
If we were to develop a national EV supply chain strategy, for instance, you mentioned one thing that might be in there. What other things could we put in? This could be for anyone to answer this too. What other things could be in a national EV supply chain strategy?
Joanna's testimony and the principles behind it are something that we are, almost violently in agreement with. There are very important societal reasons on why you want to have a clean transportation grid. But the way you power that grid is important. The way you power the manufacture of the materials that facilitate that grid are very important. If you are displacing carbon to a lower cost jurisdiction that has an opacity in how it's administered, how it treats people, how it treats labor, and who are using our rules and our willingness to play Boy Scout around the world so they can flood those markets. I was in the solar business before this. Don't get me started about the economics of the solar business. China is not the answer. The strategy is, if we've got raw materials in the ground here, and as Joanna said, Bloomberg NEF says we're the #1 jurisdiction. Well, I represent all the suppliers. When can we buy the lithium, the Canadian cells full of Canadian lithium or nickel or cobalt or graphite? The answer is at some point. Ford has to buy materials to put in a battery that goes into a production year. If that's 2026 or 2027, pick any automaker you like. If the Chinese are ready, they'll sell it to them. If that's the only way to do it, to be able to build the vehicles to meet the mandates, we're going to have Chinese batteries. We need to take the same focus we did in landing EV investments to saying, how are we going to get the stuff out of the ground, processed, manufactured into cells that are warrantable, and these tariffs will buy us those 5 years, but that's what we should spend the next 5 years doing. That's what should be in our strategy.
And would you like to chime in?
Yeah, I think I'd like to say, if we are concerned about some of these social and environmental practices that China is pursuing in the build-out of its battery supply chain, then the answer should not be to slow the EV transition and to give up on our efforts to address climate change. The answer should be to leverage Canadian innovation and ingenuity to do it better and cleaner and faster. And in terms of what would be in an EV battery supply chain strategy, I agree. We need to find ways to accelerate the development of upstream portions of the supply chain. I see what the U.S. is doing, where they are investing in a lot of battery recycling activities to get lower cost materials, battery materials, faster and in ways that are better than for the environment. And they're not waiting for necessarily the new mines to take 10 or 15 years to get it online. They're also investing in those, but they're finding ways to innovate around reducing their reliance on China. Similarly, they're investing in alternatives to graphite, which China controls the global market on, to make sure that they've got something they can offer instead. Canadian battery companies have a lot to offer, but they're struggling to scale up. So we need to make sure that our approach to building out the supply chain is not only attracting multinationals to invest here, but is also standing up Canadian innovation and helping to scale up emerging Canadian battery leaders, which often are offering lower cost, more environmentally friendly ways of doing business.
You also, in your testimony, you've just talked about the current consultations that are going on with the subcomponents. Do you have concerns there, and what are your thoughts on that? I mean, should we not be, given the highly integrated nature of our market, just simply continuing on our following on what's going on in the United States?
I'm going to preview my submission in full here.
Okay.
Match the U.S. Measures. That's it.
Now, quickly, I mean, my colleague from Green Energy Canada talked about earlier about the low-cost production vehicles that are out there. I know my colleague from BC, Mr. Cannings, was looking for one too. I think GM just announced recently that it's retooling. It's one facility in Michigan will be producing the GM Volt again starting in 2025. So that's good news for consumers in that regard. But you also spoke, Mr. Volpe, about the highly integrated nature of our auto sector. I mean, since the Auto Pact in the 60s, and the emission standards approach. I mean, we've followed that approach with the United States since that time. But with the sales mandate of 2035 and the U.S. not having a sales mandate, are we even able to meet that mandate in the production? We won't have a supply chain established in Canada by that time to service the requirements of getting an industry started. Would you not agree?
Yeah, look, if you look at my public statements from the beginning, from when the EV mandate was first proposed at the end of 2022, and then when it came in, we will not meet that standard. One of the things we implored the environment minister to do is, and the previous environment minister, this industry works when the EPA and Canada are aligned. California is an important market, but it's a market. States that align with California are important, but they're markets. Car companies who operate on single-digit EBITDA will build to the bigger market. And if you diverge and you cause for companies to have to engineer a different configuration, you're going to take cost out of them. Now, who wins? Companies that don't have to profit. And where do they come from? China. Why did Western-based players fly into China in the early 2000s when they joined the WTO? Well, first of all, there are no Canadian OEMs, so I'm not maligning any Canadian OEMs. OEMs said, well, we can make more profit if we take advantage of the manufacturing costs deltas there. Well, the Chinese learned how to make cars at global quality standards, and they learned the manufacturing processes, the technology in that, as well as anybody else. But what we didn't calculate was they don't care about profit.
Yeah.
So now we're in trouble.
And 2 minutes. And the notion of let's regulate the emission standard and leave the consumer choice there. And the Vehicle Manufacturers Association mentioned that just the other day. And I mean, there are ICE engines that are highly effective in their emission standards, right? Hybrids and EVs. And again, I don't think we'll be in a position to meet the 2035 standard now in terms of establishing an integrated supply chain. So why don't we place it, again, go back to what's been so successful for the industry in having those emission standards in place. And as the market matures, you'll see the growth of the EV market. Would you not agree?
Yes, I think we're all committed to that electrification. Electrons versus combustion is actually good for everybody. Better product, cleaner product, and I think Canada's positioned to win there. Okay, but there's nothing wrong with saying that you bought a 6-cylinder Dodge Charger from Windsor. It supports a lot of jobs, and
I've got a 2022 Buick Enclave. I worked at 4 summers at General Motors, so I purchased a GM product. The carbon intensity that went into the production of that vehicle is cleaner than what would come in from China today, and people don't realize that. So how do we get people to understand or reconcile the fact that, I mean, what is coming in from China is you've got a state-sanctioned, low-cost. They're heavily subsidizing slave labor, and they're 1/3 of the world's carbon emissions.
So how do we do that? I think we have to do things like this. We have to have frank conversations amongst each other that are nonpartisan, that say, okay, look, do we like the jobs? Do we like the industry? Do we like the investments in Canada? If we do, and we value that EV transition, we know that Canadian auto industry has always won when it can sell to American consumers. What are the American regulators doing for that market? We should do the similar thing here. Now, that's not to say, hey, the Americans are going to take the lead. I think we have better auto drive and connected drive technology in this country. We have the upstream capabilities and the ability to be a major battery player globally here. But if we jump out quicker than companies like Toyota Motor Manufacturing Canada that made 125,000 hybrids last year that don't qualify in any of the standards, we're going to try to go faster than Toyota. Well, that means going into the arms of BYD and CIIT, and there's no Canadian content there. Yeah. And everybody there makes $2 an hour when they get paid.
Bravo. Thank you.
Yeah. International free trade, as we know, is dead. I foresee a time in near future where we'll build a firewall around Canada, United States, and Mexico. Maybe we'll just open a bit for our friendly countries like Korea, Japan, Australia, and maybe part of Europe. Mr. Wolpe, it was quite interesting when part of answering you mentioned, indicated safety as the reason why North American car manufacturers are building bigger cars. And immediately my thought was, what about the millions of small cars currently running in Canada now, and the small cars that we are importing from our friendly countries like Korea and Japan. Anyway, that is a discussion for a different time. Mr. Joan thank you so much. You did mention several times, he emphasized the EV affordability, which I agree with. To fight climate change, we have taken the right direction to go for the electrical vehicle things. And not just the electrical vehicles, but also energy storage, etc. But talking of electrical vehicles, you did mention affordability in a big way. As I'm sure you know, I know that no North American manufacturers are planning any affordable size, small size electrical vehicle. In your view, I know you may not have done the extensive study, how many years or how many decades you think it will take for North American car manufacturer to start building affordable or small electric vehicles?
Well, I think it has to happen soon if we want to be able to reach mainstream buyers.
It has to happen soon. I agree. I want to know, what is your time estimate? How many years we Canadians who can't afford to buy bigger vehicles have to wait?
Let's say 5 years. Let's say 5 years. And this idea that there's no demand for smaller, more affordable vehicles, it's not true. The top-selling vehicle in Canada by far is the Tesla Model 3. Before the Chevy Bolt was discontinued, the second top-selling EV was the Chevy Bolt. These are small, affordable electric vehicles.
And even in the gasoline cars, if I'm not wrong, Honda Civic is the top-selling car in North America, if I'm not wrong. But anyway, I got limited time. I'm sure you appreciate that. On the energy side, we are talking about we have got critical minerals, from mines to mobility we talk about. Most of the time, the talks are around developing mines and developing batteries, manufacturing batteries and manufacturing electric cars. I don't see many of us talking on the critical component of mineral processing, which China controls 70 to 90% of the market in the world. So should we impose tariffs on that now?
I think when we're talking about the upcoming consultation or the current consultation around all of the other parts of the battery supply chain, it's very hard to paint that with a broad brush. Just in terms of the critical minerals, we've got 31 to think about, or at least 6 or 7 that are very high value within the EV battery supply chain. So I think in each case, we have to look at what's the level of reliance on China, what alternatives do we have available and when can they come online? What are Canada's capacities to produce those components? And then again, what are the cost impacts on producers and ultimately Canadian buyers? And so when we're talking about things like cathode active materials or battery cell manufacturing, we have landed a lot of investment in those parts of the supply chain in Canada.
I got very limited time. Mr. Volpe, one quick question. We have imposed tariff on steel imports you come from the manufacturing sector, so I'm sure you will appreciate. There are many products within the steel industry that are not manufactured in Canada. In fact, CFIB, Canadian Federation for Independent Businesses, have raised this issue where the products that are not manufactured in Canada are also getting tariff imposed on them, making it unnecessarily expensive for Canadian small businesses. So do you agree, do you support imposition of across-the-board tariffs on steel imports?
I think the treatment of steel is very clear in automotive in the USMCA. And I think you had the steel people in here last week. There's no daylight between us and their position. And I will say that this current government has invested in making small electric vehicles with Honda in 2027, I believe. And they're available from all of the manufacturers that are Western-based in this market over the next few years. So I think you may want to correct that.
And if I may, one last question on the same grounds. You said no charities in business. That's an interesting thing because that's the right thing. I come from private sector. How come the North American car manufacturer have stopped manufacturing small vehicles when the friendly countries like Japan and Korea are still manufacturing small cars and continue to be profitable?
Those Korean and Japanese manufacturers manufacture those small vehicles in North America at a profit. So in as much as that is a North American investment by a Western-based player, I'm not sure that your characterization is correct.
No, then you mean to say that the major manufacturers like General Motors, Ford, etc., North American-based, so the argument you use, no charities in business, I thought it was related to small car manufacturing, if I'm not wrong. So then you are only referring to the North American owned or North American car manufacturers.
I think you misunderstood the characterization.
Can you clarify that, Mr. Volpe, so that it's clear?
There's no charities in business, meaning that in the automotive business, they're all private companies. And they're either private or they're publicly traded, but they have to produce a profit. Otherwise, there's no path forward. There's a difference in China You can be a major manufacturer and a major supplier and not have profit as one of your dynamics. So charities, I would say, I used in quotes, and sorry if you missed the nuance.
Okay, I think that's clear. Everybody understands exactly what Mr. Volpe was meaning. We have to go into committee business, which takes a bit of time. Is there anyone that has some urgent question that they need to get an answer to today? Okay, I guess everybody is all right. Okay, so to our witnesses, thank you so very much for the information. We will take it forward, and I'm sure you'll be keeping an eye on what work the committee is doing as we progress.